Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 62 of Fracking Nightmare. Moving rapidly up towards the 100th episode, and I must confess that is one milestone that I sincerely hope we never reach. Hopefully we can nail this insidious industry and get some common sense to prevail amongst the elected representatives before it reaches that point. But we have an interesting evening. We're going to be focusing very much on the new front line, which is certainly in the short term going to be Yorkshire. But since the last episode of Fracking Nightmare, it's been quite an eventful week. In fact, after last week's episode, the following day I took to the road and headed up towards North Yorkshire to attend the meeting that had been organised by a former Rydale GP, Dr. Tim Thornton. But whilst I was on my way there, on the A1M in Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, I was tailgated by a BMW. And if we pull this up on screen, you can see this is the number plate from my dash cam. And this car came up on me. I mean, I was doing 75 mile an hour or so in the stream of traffic, and this car came up on me like the proverbial bat out of hell, and was literally riding on my tailgate. The driver was gesticulating for me to get out of the way, which wasn't possible because there was 3 lanes of traffic. And when eventually I was able to pull over, as the car drove past, of course, I caught sight of the number plate, and you see it there, oil 6366, and I thought, well, that's remarkably coincidental. So the driver fortunately got held up in some traffic a little way up the road, and that was when I managed to catch the number plate on my dash cam. Now, I don't suggest for one moment that there was any ulterior motive here. It's simply one of those acausal synchronicities. But I'd be pretty crazy if I didn't think that somebody somewhere in the unconventional gas industry had it cross their mind that it might be rather fortunate for them if I was to be run off the road. Well, it didn't happen this time. And the universe has some remarkable ways of communicating sometimes, so maybe that was just a warning for me to be on my guard. So I have no intention whatsoever of reporting this to police. I mean, any regular viewer of Fracking Nightmare will know my attitude towards the British police these days, because we don't have a British police force, of course. We have a corporate enforcement force. But if anybody does happen to know the driver of this uniquely numbered vehicle, OIL 6366, perhaps advise him to drive a little bit more conservatively, particularly in heavy traffic. Well, needless to say, I did get to North Yorkshire unscathed, and the meeting that was hosted by Dr. Tim Thornton, where he had some specialist speakers, one speaker from the Midlands, an environmental scientist, a public health specialist, and an environmental specialist from Sussex. Now, the meeting was attended by at least 400 people, and we're going to be joined by David Davis from Frack Free Rydale shortly, and Dave is of the opinion that it was probably closer to 500, and I'm not really about to argue with that, because certainly the hall in the school was almost full to capacity. Now, about half that, probably maybe a little more, stayed for the Q&A. But what was very interesting to me was that when Tim Thornton asked for a show of hands as to who was from Pickering, it was certainly probably close to 3/4 of the audience, with the remainder being from either Rydale or the surrounding area, like Scarborough or Harrogate and the Knaresborough area. So an extremely impressive turnout, and indicative of the level of awareness within North Yorkshire. Now, before I join Dave, I do want to once more draw your attention to this campaign. If I can bring it up on the screen here. There we go. This is the campaign by Frack Free Lancashire to raise the £10,000 they need to initiate the judicial review. Now, the deadline for submitting the judicial review is tomorrow, and the documentation is ready to submit, so the judicial review will be lodged in time. But and £1,000 has to be lodged with that documentation. But it does mean that over the next few days, Frack Free Lancashire do need to raise another £4,500. So if you go to this website and if you simply search for Lancashire County Council fracking decisions, you will go straight to this fundraising page, and you can pledge anything from £2 upwards. And every little helps. And if for whatever reason you're not able to make a donation towards this essential fund, then please share it as widely as you possibly can. And to date, 240 people have donated to this fund. And I do have to say that if I was sitting on the industry side, then I would actually be rubbing my hands, because that's not particularly a good number there after sort of some 4 weeks of the appeal. So as with all these things, it all comes together at the last minute. So please, if you can, this appeal will finish at the weekend, but if you can contribute, then please do so. So Lancashire, obviously Quadrilla are on the back foot there. They've announced that they are going to launch an appeal. Of course, the word has been fed from the various government departments that it will probably take something in the region of 16 months before that appeal can be heard. Meanwhile, the 14th round is about to be announced. The adjudications are about to be announced. It's already been stated that they'll be announced in 2 tranches. The first tranche being those licenses that, and this is a very worrying statement, do not necessarily need full environmental impact assessments. Now, I'm joined this evening by Dave Davis from Frack Free Rydale in North Yorkshire. So, Dave, thanks for joining me this evening.
Hi, good evening, Ian.
I think I'm right in saying this is your first time on Fracking Nightmare. Would that be right?
It is. That's correct.
It's always good to have new faces. And of course, it also shows that this movement is growing at a phenomenal rate of knots.
Yeah, it sure is up here.
Yeah. So, Dave, what is your background? How long have you been living in North Yorkshire?
Where I live at the moment, I've lived here for about 2.5 years, but I've lived in Yorkshire for 26 years overall, and I've been very happy to make it my home over those years. The first I knew about fracking was really when I saw them doing some test drilling in the backfield to drop some charges down, sort of 15-foot deep holes, I think, to do a seismic survey.
That was literally in your backyard?
Well, it was probably about 150 metres away from my back fence, yeah.
And how long ago was that?
That was July 2014.
Right. Okay, so that was the first time that this really had crossed your radar?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's just 13 months ago. So, obviously, as we saw last Wednesday, the level of interest or awareness in North Yorkshire has risen exponentially. So just maybe walk us through what's happened in North Yorkshire over that 13 months.
Okay, well, the group really never formed as such as Frack Free Rydale. We were just a group of concerned people. There was a meeting in our local village hall in Hovingham, and to be honest, I went away from that meeting thinking, well, this can't be true, what was presented to us. And I thought, well, I'll go and investigate, as everybody else did at that meeting, on the internet. And you come back and you just come away with more and more questions rather than the answers you were hoping to find. And after that, it just started to grow. And, throughout Rydale, we've probably got somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people who are regular visitors, both to our website, our Facebook page. And, we started off really just by trying to raise public awareness, because there's very little done by the local council or the county council about it whatsoever. And we, in fact, started by trying to get petitions signed. We got enough signatures to get Rydale District Council to have a public debate on the issue, and also enough signatures for the County Council to have the Rydale Area Committee take notice of what we wanted them to do, our proposal in that particular petition. However, to get a full meeting of the council to discuss it would take about 35,000 signatures. And when you bear in mind the population of Rydale is just around 53,000, I think we realised that we were never going to get that number of signatures quickly. And so we focused on what we could do, and it has grown. In April, we had a bit of a rally through Malton. People who I know who've lived in Malton all their lives tell me it's the biggest rally they've ever seen in living memory through the town. And that was, pretty much a fun public day, just marching through the town, just to let people know that, there are an awful lot of locals here who really aren't that happy.
And we're going to see a little bit of footage from that rally a bit later on in the programme this evening. So now, over the period of that 13 months or so, obviously there was a public meeting, you went away, did your research, but have Third Energy held any public meetings to try to allay the concerns of the population?
Well, they have carried out some public consultation meetings relating to their planning application, which has only just very recently gone in. This was back in February. They were hoping to put this to the council, I think in early March or at the latest in April, but for one reason or another it's been delayed. And at those meetings there was the usual information boards. Anybody who's been to a planning consultation for an industrial type of development will have seen this sort of thing. It makes it look almost quite attractive on their photographs and so on, but they don't actually give you the full information. And as we found, as both the environmental permitting applications have gone in and the planning applications, the information itself has unravelled and developed, and seems to be a bit of a changing feast.
Well, in previous programmes, we've actually discussed the fact that Third Energy seemed unable to actually complete the application correctly, and it was only validated as being in an appropriate format where it could be accepted by the council just a little over a week or so ago, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, they had difficulty actually describing the development because they have, as everybody will know, a legal duty to advertise the development and their proposal in both the local press and in notices locally in proximity of the site. And their issue was that what they're actually applying for was somewhat different to the description part on those notices. And then that was initially a major problem. They were told about it and they didn't really listen to the council. They altered quite a few of the other bits that they'd got wrong in the first submission, but subsequently they still managed to mess it up the second time. It could be argued, as I'm sure the other side would, that the County Council are probably taking a very careful and considered approach, because obviously they don't want to be party to a judicial review subsequent to any decision that's made.
But it is rather unfortunate that Third Energy only released the full extent of the deficiency once they were forced to reveal that by Freedom of Information request. So yeah, any suggestion that they were totally transparent is somewhat laid to rest.
Yeah, well, indeed. If I had £1 for every time they tell me, what good neighbours they are, what good citizens they've been in our community for 20 years, even though they only took the company over a few years ago, and so on. Well, I wouldn't be rich, but I could have a good night out for sure.
Well, obviously the pace is hotting up now because we're fast approaching the deadline for objections or submissions to be made to the Environment Agency regarding Third Energy's desire to frack the well known as KM8, which is the deep well that's adjacent to the well that is producing conventional hydrocarbons, which are being fed into the Napton generating station. But KM8 is there awaiting to be fracked, and this is the opportunity for the last few days of opportunity for people to object. So can you just talk us through that process?
Yeah, of course. What I would direct everybody to do to make things easier for themselves is to go straight to the Frack Free Rydale website, and they will find their way very easily to our page relating to getting a consultation response into the Environment Agency. We have met with the Environment Agency, and they have encouraged us actively to put submissions in about things that are of major concern to us. Obviously, these things have got to be things that they regulate, so it's not really much point in complaining about the amount of traffic and that type of thing per se, because that's probably more of a planning issue, although the emissions will feed into part of the environmental permitting situation. But we have got a guidance sheet on there that sort of outlines the major shortcomings that we foresee around the attempted regulation to make this safe as far as what the Environmental Agency govern. Obviously, it straddles with the HSE, who are on for the well, but you don't have any consultation rights for that. But yeah, I mean, there are a whole host of things that we see as being fairly weak points in what was submitted in the 2,600 or so pages of documentation by Third Energy.
Now, when I hear of a document that contains that number of pages, my immediate reaction is that much of that will be deliberate padding. I mean, this is a normal industry practice that basically anything and everything that you think you can throw in, you do. Obviously, you do it on the basis that you don't want to be accused of not submitting information. I mean, Third Energy, of course, have a lot of practice of that. But the other factor is, of course, that if you can literally make the document so thick, then it's the proverbial needle in the haystack, and you're making it as difficult as possible for people to really be able to sort through what the real plans are.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is, as you say, standard practice within the industry. There's a lot of repetition. There's also little bits of information in some parts that you would expect to be in other parts, because there's technical appendices, there's an environmental statement, which was essentially, I think, probably lifted straight from the planning documentation as well. And there are inconsistencies in there. There's an awful lot about the chemicals, which I think are proprietary chemicals via Halliburton. And I know Halliburton are probably having national talks with the Environment Agency about the chemicals, but it just says in the column about whether it's hazardous or non-hazardous, it says non-hazardous assumed. So whether it's a case they hadn't actually got that agreement when they submitted that document, nobody really knows. But of course, non-hazardous in Environment Agency terms doesn't relate to non-hazardous as per the Oxford English Dictionary. I think it was explained to me by somebody at the Environment Agency that basically, if it's non-hazardous, it means it doesn't bioaccumulate. And if as a scientist, I probably fully understand what that means. I think I know what it means, but the fact that non-hazardous doesn't mean what most people in the street would imagine in itself is a bit of an issue.
Well, and the fact that it says non-hazardous assumed, it might as well say hazardous assumed, but of course they're not going to put that. But I mean, basically, it's equally as ambiguous.
Well, indeed, and for a document that is dealing with what is, we're being told, is the gold standard safety behind the the proposed potential saviour of our energy security and everything else, it really is pretty poor.
Well, and the other factor is that, I mean, the industry, and as well as the local authority, of course, will know very well that they are being scrutinised on this like probably never before. Yeah. So, one would think that they would literally cross every T, dot every I to the absolute nth degree within their 2,000 plus pages, and literally make sure that there is nothing that could be open to any kind of criticism or negative connotation. But it doesn't seem to be that way. In fact, it seems to be pretty slapdash.
Well, it does to the layperson, and once if you get an expert to run their eyes over parts of it, even more inconsistencies come out, and it is quite startling, really. But it's the nature of what we're dealing with here. It is a very complex and technical area, and there's no way that somebody as myself is going to understand the technicalities of what they're proposing to do in terms of the chemicals, the amounts, and you look at the air quality monitoring, the water monitoring. They all use different units, different values. It's not what you would imagine as monitoring either. It's not real-time monitoring. It's sort of, leave it 4 weeks, send it off to the lab, you get the results a week later. So it's sort of fifth week monitoring, if you like. It all just doesn't seem to fit with the gold standards that we keep being told about by the people in the Houses of Parliament. Well,
and as one of the speakers observed at the event last Wednesday, we keep hearing about the gold standard, but then, who gets the silver standard or the bronze standard or the paper standard? Yeah. I mean, either a standard is a standard, or it's not. So, I mean, it's very much a throwaway phrase that means nothing, but is actually intended to, of course, just shut you up, basically.
Yeah, well, it is, and if people, it takes some digging around to find out this stuff, but we all sort of pick and choose what we like to use as your evidence, and I think a lot of people in the UK, as soon as you mention America, it's like an off switch. They don't want to know. But quite a bit of the industry regulations, which in effect are it's their best practice, and that is taken as what are going to be the regulations. Some of that is produced by the American Petroleum Institute. So and that is the UCOG. You can go on their website, you can look at it, and it tells you all those. And people are here saying, well, no, it'll never be done anything like it is in America. Well, they're providing effectively some of the regulations that are going to be our gold standard.
And of course, the other factor is that those who are going to be responsible for monitoring this, I mean, as you may already observed, in many cases it's going to be self-assessment.
Indeed.
But even, we're seeing a situation where the Environment Agency, well, not just the Environment Agencies, many government agencies are about to be pared back. And I mean, I was having a conversation with somebody who works quite closely with the Environment Agency and with DEC, and their observation was, at best, there are two people who have any real understanding of this industry that they can call upon, and at best, there will be 19, at best, other staff within the department that will be responsible for monitoring and regulation. And that's in a situation where we have an industry that basically is looking to drill many thousands of wells if it gets its way.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we know from East Yorkshire, without protection camps, quite a few environmental incidents would just go past unreported. And even when they are reported, it took several days for somebody from the Environment Agency to actually turn up. And if that's any standard, it's a shoddy standard.
Absolutely. Now, Dave, just before we take the first break, let's direct people to the website. It's frackfreerydale.org.
That's correct.
And we've got that up on the screen here. And there's a section right here, right on the front page there, which if you click on that,
that's it.
Apparently, it should take you to everything you need to know about submitting your objection or your concerns to the Environment Agency for the KM8 well.
That's correct, it will. It'll take you straight there.
Okay, well, don't run away, Dave. We'll be right back after this short break.
Okay.
The Alternative View Conference. The AV6 DVD collection. Enjoy 13 fantastic presentations on 12 discs from some of the best researchers in their fields.
What a weekend, hey? What a weekend, like what a range of speakers, what a hard bunch of acts to follow, really. I've heard some of the most important information here today, really, because honestly, I've spoken at a lot of gigs, and I'd say this is the best gig that I've spoken at.
These unique presentations are essential viewing for all those who have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and who are now ready to participate in bringing about the changes that we all know we need to see. AV6. 12 discs in 2 volumes. Order now from ukcolumn.org. AV Events, taking positive activism to the next level.
And welcome back to part 2 of episode 62 of Fracking Nightmare. With me this evening is David Davis from Frack Free Rydale. Now, David, just before we started this conversation, I was talking about the plan to announce the next tranche of licenses in the 14th round. Now, what is your take on, I think it was Andrea Ledson, who said that it would be announced in 2 tranches. So we know that 95 of the 295 areas were bid for. But she said that the first tranche is going to be those areas that don't need full environmental impact assessment. What's your interpretation of that?
Well, my interpretation of that is we're just trying to hurry everything along down the wrong road altogether. It just makes me think that the standards that are being applied are nowhere near what we're being promised. And I think if we start going down the route where we're not going to have full environmental impact surveys, I think it's just going to be open season, for all of those licensed areas. Well, I just pity anybody who lives there
or anywhere close.
Yeah,
I mean,
indeed.
In the worst case scenario, I mean, what strikes me is it might be a bit like the US was in the prior to the Clinton years.
Yeah.
Where basically if an area was designated as an industrial zone, pretty much anything went. There was no regulation, there was certainly no monitoring, no controls, and so much land became contaminated that the government under Clinton set up a super fund which companies could then tap into if they acquired a company that was effectively responsible for the contamination. And unfortunately, of course, there's always if you like, an unexpected impact. And what happened was that it set off a whole bunch of acquisitions as companies bought up some of their competitors because they now had the opportunity to tap into the super fund and, of course, pay top dollar for a supposed cleansing of that soil. But we know that there are areas of this country that, because of excessive industrialisation, have suffered similarly. But God forbid that we end up in a situation like that, because I mean the situation in the US is that, of course, it's a much larger landmass and a lot less heavily populated, certainly a lot less densely populated.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we notice here, relatively speaking, with other parts of the UK. If you look at the BGS shale map that went out in June, you look at the Warrington and northern Manchester area, all through that, is got the possibility to have shale gas plays, according to the BGS. And yeah, I think it would be quite devastating, whether it's a highly populated or a sparsely populated area, to go down the route that's required for this type of fuel extraction, because at the end of the day, it really is an industrial scale that's required to make it viable.
Well, absolutely. And we've mentioned a couple of times on previous programmes that perversely, the Tory government has every intention of deliberately targeting Tory-held constituencies, because they believe that although there will be elements within the community that will put up a fight through the planning process, but once that process has been exhausted, their belief is that the population will simply throw up its hands and say, oh, well, we tried, we did our best, we can't stop it, and then the trucks will roll. And they think that because it's a Tory-held constituency, that they won't actually sort of go into open revolt, because they won't want to go against their elected MP.
Yeah, well, we've got I think probably one of the biggest Tory majorities with our incumbent MP, and he actually increased well, it wasn't his majority to increase, but he's a new MP, but at least he is local to the area. He is, openly pro-fracking, but he has some concerns that are in a zone that are concerns for us as well. But we just wish he wasn't so pro-fracking.
Well, now I do understand that he actually met with a couple of the campaign community from East Yorkshire, because they have the experience with Rathlin, and I believe that at that meeting. And in fact, I actually know it to be true, because I actually saw it reported in the Yorkshire Post today. But he's committed to take a road trip to Pennsylvania, funded by himself, to see the effect that the industry has had on communities in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, he's been quite, hot off the blocks, if you like, since he was elected. He held a debate in Westminster Hall, and I think that was either on a Monday or a Tuesday. The Saturday before that, he actually went to one of our groups for a coffee morning, and there were about 45 or 50 local residents, and I think that really did make him appreciate that it is actually locals who are bothered about this. It isn't activists or anybody else. It's not people coming in from right, left and centre. It's just people who've lived here. A lot of the farmers who are on board, their families have farmed the land for generations. And, they are concerned that a neighbour could have a well on their land, could drill under their own land, contaminate it, but they're not able to take any action against anybody. They're unable to obtain insurance and all those sort of issues. And it's really sort of having quite a big effect with some of our community. A lot of stress, I would say.
Oh, without any shadow of doubt. I mean, and by the way, I mean, that's a common denominator. I certainly am sensing the stress in Lancashire. I mean, there was a degree of relief once the councillors rejected the applications for Oscar and Preston New Road. But as soon as Quadrilla announced that they were planning to appeal, even though, of course, that was expected, but nonetheless, the people, went back into their stress mode. And I mean, some of these people, of course, I've got to know, quite well over the last few years. And I mean, I can see it is, having impact on their health.
Yeah, indeed. And it does make you wonder about the sort of work that goes into, I'm just thinking about reading through a lot of the planning documentation at the moment, and you look at the public health assessment that they've done, and it is largely a desktop-based assessment using data, some of which, well, at best is probably 3 or 4 years old, but a lot of it's actually 7 or 8 years old. And there is no... it doesn't seem to take into account a lot of things that you would expect.
Well, in some cases, I mean, the industry, I mean, if you go back to Queensland, I mean, the industry was barely in its infancy, 8, 9 years ago. And, so it's only in the last 2, 3 years, arguably, that the full impact has been realised. But I just want to go back a second while I think about it to Kevin Hollinrake's trip to the US, because I am very, very sure that since this morning, when that was announced in the Yorkshire Post, that the unconventional gas industry in the US has probably been contacted by the unconventional gas industry in the UK, not least Third Energy, and said, hey, we need your help here. We need to manage this guy's trip. We need to be very, very selective about the locations he's taken to. We need to make sure that he's taken to some tame landowners who, we've got under contract. They're not allowed to say anything against the industry, because if they do, we shut down their income. So what I would hope is that maybe yourself, Dave, and anybody else watching this who has Kevin Hollinrake's ear, is to suggest to him that, I'm sure he's going to take up the industry on its invitation, but he should also spend a few days in the company of someone like Vera Scoggins. Now, Vera has actually got court orders banning her from parts of Pennsylvania because she is seen as disruptive, which of course means that she's actually educating people on the truth and on the facts. So to get a balance to his trip, one would hope that Kevin Hollinrake would actually make the effort to, and I think he should, spend some time with the industry representatives and hear how they spin the positive side of their impact on the community, and then spend some time with Vera Scoggins, who can introduce him to residents of the area that have got some absolute horror stories, and then he can decide from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm sure Kevin will get a few tweets suggesting that he does do a little bit of independent research.
Well, I think we'll do that. I think after the programme this evening, I will, and I'm sure some people can get on it right away. But I can certainly make the introduction to Vera Scoggins, and Vera Scoggins in Pennsylvania and Brian Monk in Queensland would be my recommendations as the tour guide for the concerned citizens. And then, it doesn't matter who he talks to from the industry, because he's going to hear the same old spin and palliatives, whoever he talks to.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, it'd be very interesting to see his reaction when he comes back, because, of course, if he is totally objective, then he's going to have to step outside the party whip.
Yeah, well, yeah, I suspect that may not happen somehow.
Oh, you cynic. So now we've talked about KM8, and of course that's the environmental agency's part of the deal for this Friday. But then it goes to North Yorkshire Council Planning Committee for their review.
Yeah, at the moment they're scheduling it for some time. I think the date on the website suggests it's going to be mid to late November. We hope that we'll get a little bit longer than that, because I think we need to study the documentation. There's a considerable amount more than there was for the environmental permits. Thankfully, maybe some of it is not quite as technical. It's quite clear.
Did I hear there's 7,000 pages in the full application?
It could well be. I haven't actually totaled them up because there are so many documents. I thought, well, I better get on with reading these, because I'll probably waste an hour trying to total them up. But there's many megabytes available, that's for sure. So if anybody's struggling to get to sleep at night, I could recommend a couple of appendices straight off, but I won't. Yeah, I would say to anybody who is interested, probably the best way to get a handle on what they're proposing to do is to read the planning statement, read chapter 6, that's called the development, and that'll tell you more or less in about 20 odd pages or so what they're planning to do. It won't tell you necessarily how much water they're going to do, or the chemicals they're going to use, or the number of lorries that will be needed, but it will tell you that they hope once they've carried out a successful production test that they hope to carry on producing gas for maybe 9 or 10 years, which is somewhat different to the consultations back in, I think it was February 2015, where they were very much marketing this as a test frack just to see if they could flow gas. And I think there are quite a lot of areas where a bit more information keeps coming out, and certainly there's a lot more information here than we've had on the Environment Agency applications. So we know the sort of things that they're planning to do in terms of time, how long the development's going to take, and so on. And as I say, it is a bit of a changing, movable feast. And I don't know whether that's because they have to negotiate with DEC over what they're going to do in terms of the frack, but we actually now know that they're going to frack all of the zones that they're planning to stimulate. They're actually using proppant in all of them. At the Environment Agency consultation, several people there, including myself, were told that the first 2 or 3 fracks aren't going to be using proppant. It's just to measure the crack length and that type of thing. So even you relate what's actually going to be happening to what the Environment Agency have been told is going to happen, and it does bring into question a lot of the information that's already been supplied to the Environment Agency for the permitting side. Okay,
and for those that are still sort of wrestling with some of the terminology here, the proppant is the sand or the silica or the ceramic, whatever material they're using, which is actually pumped into the fractures to keep the fractures open. It's actually what prevents the fractures from closing. So in other words, it's what creates the artificial porosity and permeability in the geology, which basically means that they're actually looking to establish what the flow rate would be in the event of going to full production.
Absolutely. And I think the other issue from our perspective is that there's parts in the planning statement that talk about, well, obviously major workovers are common practice when you're drilling and you've got a borehole, but they do talk about boreholes and wells in the plural, and there is only this one hole that goes down to just over 10,000 feet. So we're just wondering if they're thinking about maybe doing a little bit more drilling, because that's rather what it would suggest. And I know drilling technology, like everything else, probably improves with time. Maybe there's some new technique, which certainly on, I think it was iGas or INEOS, I can't remember whose presentation's just been bumped onto the Howardian Hills Area of Outstanding Natural Beauties website to help the public understand what fracking is. But in there they were suggesting they had a very tight turn technology for the drilling so they could go horizontal. So I don't know if that's the sort of thing they're thinking of doing, because I think we've canvassed a little bit of opinion as to whether it's really practical to get 9 years worth of gas from the sort of volume of frack that they're doing. And I think the thoughts generally are that it probably isn't possible to do that.
But John Dewar has stated categorically that ultimately he foresees 900 wells within the licensed area. And that's not going to be 900 vertical shafts. That'll be something in the region of maybe 90 vertical shafts or 120 vertical shafts, and then horizontal sections off of that. And the average radius, by the way, for turning horizontal is around about 300 meters. So unless they're looking to do something a bit tighter, but if they are looking to go tighter, then you start to come into some very interesting casing issues because of the cement bonding.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be all sorts of interesting issues, and this is all way out of my technical expertise. So I think our biggest problem is we know that Third Energy to make this work in a viable way will need more than one well site. And as you say, John Deere has said that they'd probably be looking at about 19 or so, with between 20 and 50 wells. So, you know, it's a lot of wells and a lot of everything that goes with that.
In a beautiful area of the country. We're going to take another short break. And in this break, David, we're going to look at a short piece of video from the Moulton March. And I mean, I've seen estimates of anything from 700 to 1,000 people on this march in April. And when we consider, as we said earlier, that, you know, basically a year ago, there really was hardly any awareness. And I mean, this just goes to show what an amazing job you guys have done in Rydale in terms of raising awareness. So we'll take a short break and take a look at this. Welcome back to part 3, Fracking Nightmare. So that was Moulton, the largest town in Rydale, in the southern edge of the North York Moors. A town of some 10,000 or so people, maybe not even, but close to 1,000 people marching through the town there, helping to raise awareness of Third Energy's intention to frack right across the Rydale area. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. I mean, to drive the road out of your hometown, Hovingham, I mean, to drive that road towards what I call the Masonic Highway, Castle Howard. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful view across the Vale of Pickering, and yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine, you know, even one well site being established in that vale, let alone multiple well sites, and of course as you rightly said, the corresponding increase in traffic.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it doesn't bear thinking about. So let's hope we can do what we need to do properly and stop them.
Well, and we made the observation about the numbers of pages in the documentation. And, one of the great strengths of the anti-fracking community is that because it's non-hierarchical, because it's, basically everybody's encouraged to bring whatever it is that they are able or wish to bring, to the campaign. And, to have the potential for so many people to be scrutinising this documentation is so important, isn't it? Because, different people will pick up on different aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's vital to us that all our members I just encourage them to, in their various groups out there, have a meeting and just say, well, I'll look at Appendix 18, somebody else will look at Appendix 12, because you start to, if you take the technical detail away from it, you start to see that there are quite a few inconsistencies, and you'll then have to look at probably 4 or 5 of the other parts of the documentation just to clarify the fact that you're not misreading something and something doesn't actually tie in with what you've been told in that appendices. It takes a bit of doing, but I would highly recommend it as long as you don't read the whole thing, because that would deserve a prize.
Indeed. Well, hey, listen, I'm sure that the combined resource of Frack Free Rideout, and of course it's not even limited to just Frack Free Rideout. I mean, the documentation is open to all, and I mean, anybody who feels motivated to go take a look at it, please do so. And if you pick up something that you think is of concern or should be of concern, then flag it up. You go on to the Frack Free Rideout Facebook page. You can message the administrators if you don't want to go public with your concerns. But the important thing is, share the information, share it around. And as I told Third Energy at the last Helmsley meeting, where they were discussing the Ebbston re-injection well, and the guy sitting behind me said, what are you going to do? What are you going to do every time they come up with a new objection? And I just turned around to him and said, mate, you're doing this because you're on the payroll. These people are doing it because they're passionate. And passion will trump payroll every day of the week.
Yeah, indeed. And, Ebbston Moor's an interesting case because it really revolves around a lot of technical arguments relating to the European Water Framework Directive and what is allowed to be put back into the ground. We're currently in the situation up there that they can put radioactive water back into the re-injection well, but if it isn't radioactive, they're not allowed to put that into the well. So there's something wrong with the regulation in a way. But it's an interesting technical argument, and it is a very technical argument because I think it's been a long-running argument in the industry where conventional oil and gas comes out of the ground. If it's wet, it gets separated off, and the conventional practice is to just put the wastewater, back into the producing formation. Well, in this case, they don't want to do that. But there are schools of thought that feel that just putting it into the existing producing formation is probably against the Water Framework Directive. But in this case, they're wanting to put it into a completely different strata altogether, the Sherwood Sandstone Formation. And the novel thing in terms of re-injection is this actually lies above the producing formation, whereas normally re-injection is done where it's below the producing formation. So it isn't just a straightforward re-injection job. There's quite a lot of issues in play. The Sherwood Sandstone Formation is also going to be used when they start constructing the potash mine near Whitby, because and that's going to create different flows in the strata. So there are a good number of issues there which should be really making those making the decision sit up and take notice.
Well, and of course the North York Moors Planning Committee were really, how should I say, up against it with the potash mine, and in fact that was a decision that was taken at central government level. And it's going to be interesting to see how they do react to this proposal. By the way, I stumbled across an EA report, an Environmental Agency report of a couple of years ago, which stated categorically that re-injection would not be allowed, never be permitted in the UK. And yet here we are with Third Energy making just such an application.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, re-injection shouldn't really be allowed in any situation. The argument here is that it's conventional gas and that's okay, whereas with fracking, and I've asked the Environment Agency for what regulation it's in. Is it in a statutory instrument? And I still haven't had any response from them where it says that fracking, you can't re-inject the wastewater, but they all automatically all come out with, oh no, that's not allowed.
Well, North Yorkshire is under mega attack from Third Energy. Obviously, Fracking Energy are still looking to establish a presence in East Yorkshire. They do have planning permission to go back to the West Newton B. In fact, they've actually run out of time, really, to go back to Crawberry Hill. They were granted a one-year extension from last October. Their operations plan calls for at least 90 days to be on site, and it's now less than 90 days before the current planning permission expires. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether Fracking Energy go back to East Riding with the request for a further extension. Whereas I, videoed the last planning meeting and the statement was categoric, where it was don't even think about it, because you either do what you plan to do in the next year or you return the site to its former glory. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, because one of the concerns I have, Dave, is that from all around the country, we are seeing a pattern emerging, because more and more parish councils are obviously starting to become concerned about the unconventional gas agenda, particularly as it impacts on their communities. And what we're seeing is town clerks effectively following the same script. They're accusing any councillor who challenges the unconventional gas agenda of being obstructive. They're actually refusing to minute these councillors' inputs. Now, if this was an isolated case, I probably wouldn't mention it. But we now have 4 independent cases that have been shared with us where this same script has been followed. So my question is, to whom do the town clerks of these parish councils report to? Because in the current situation, most of these town clerks are sitting with multiple parish councils. They don't have their own town clerk anymore. So my guess is that they report into the planning officer or a council officer of the district council. So, what we're seeing is this agenda being pushed down to try to railroad, but it's more than that, because it's actually about the removal of democracy. It's about trying to remove all local participation in this process. So, for anyone watching this, if you have any contact with your parish council, and you should, bear in mind that by the end of this year, 1/3 of this country will potentially be licensed for the exploitation of unconventional gas. And your first port of call will need to be your parish council and then to the district council. So we're seeing this pattern. And as we come to the end of tonight's programme, one final reference to Amanda Webster, the solicitor with Harrison Drury, who was spotted cozying up to Stuart Perigo at the Lancashire County Council meeting. I submitted a Freedom of Information request asking Lancashire Council to divulge her role in the proceedings. The response was due on Friday. I haven't received a response, which is very interesting. So I have now asked through the Freedom of Information request process for an internal review to explain why it is that Lancashire County Council have not responded to this FOI. That in itself is a cause for concern. David, it's a pleasure to welcome you on to Fracking Nightmare this evening.
Thank you.
You guys in Rydale are doing an absolutely amazing job. I know that the numbers are growing exponentially, and I anticipate that they will continue to do so in coming weeks. And of course, we have the Ebbston Moor meeting, the next Ebbston Moor meeting on Thursday, August the 20th. So we ask people to get their objections or observations into the Environment Agency for Kirby Misperton by this Friday. Details from the the Frack Free Rydale website, which is frackfreerydale.org. And then to come along to Helmsley and to the North York Moors offices there, just about 100 metres or so away from the main square in Helmsley. And unfortunately, there's limited seating in the room. So if you can't get into the room, then you can join the probably quite considerable number of people that will be outside the offices for that meeting, where North York Moors Planning Committee will be considering whether or not to grant Third Energy permission to re-inject the toxic waste into the sandstone above the geology from which they're extracting the gas. More is going to be unveiled, obviously, in coming weeks. It's becoming clear that the government is just waiting to pick the most opportune moment or what it thinks is the most opportune moment, to announce the 14th round, at which point more than a third of the country will be licensed for exploitation of unconventional gas on this densely populated island of ours. We have to stop this. And last but by no means least, the price of oil has fallen yet again. It closed today at under $46 a barrel, 45.94 cents to be precise. And once again, one has to ask the question, how is this viable when the marginal cost is at least $75 a barrel? Thank you for joining me. See you next week.